It's always mixed emotions coming back here. And when I landed on my feet back in Tasmania, it wasn't the best of times. It was the ultimate worst of times. And reflecting on that period, I don't know if you can hear that clock ticking, but I certainly can. Reflecting on that period now that I am diving back into the world of podcasting has really opened my eyes to a whole other perspective of life, healing, compassion, forgiveness. As I reflect on 2018, when my whole world had blown up, I've been diving back into the tabloid publications, and I never actually looked at the comments. I was blown away by just how little compassion people have. And I guess it comes from a lack of understanding, a lack of lived experience in that space with addiction, and I guess a lack of understanding as to the reasons, I guess, why people find themselves in addiction. I certainly will never make excuses for my behavior, but I certainly will never make excuses for my behavior. And I feel the reason why we, in understanding the behavior and the why things occur, we're able to educate and empower ourselves into making sure those situations are not created again, and understanding the mechanics and the mindset and the functionality of addiction and certain behavioral patterns. For me, certainly this past 7 years, therapy has helped. I know that now I've pinpointed where these coping mechanisms were born from. I've been able to untangle the web of trauma and PTSD and unhealthy coping mechanisms that I learned at a very young age during my tenure in the military. When I joined the military, I was 17. I had no idea about the world, and I lent on and relied on an institution to guide me, to teach me, to galvanize the lens, to create a lens for me to look at life through. Alcohol and drugs was a big part of that institution. We had a beer issue out at sea, so every night we were able to connect with people through alcohol. And albeit very unconscious, this created the foundation for how we would interact with each other. On a Friday afternoon, we would have divisional meetings by where if we didn't go and participate in alcohol drinking, we would have to stay at work, stay behind on shore and work. So as you can see in that paradigm, there's not too much of a choice there. Alcohol was the thread that weaved us together, that created that comradeship, that kept us tight and intimate and connecting on a level. I didn't realize just how much I relied on drugs and alcohol to connect with myself, with others, and it is called liquid courage for a reason. I now notice that I have given up alcohol and drugs and I'm sober, how much the social anxiety creeps in when I'm going into certain environments, and how I notice certain feelings in my body that in a past version of myself would have been the trigger for me to consume alcohol and consume drugs to alleviate those stresses in the body and to put that anxiety to bed. Life looks very different now, 7 years on. And even though life looks very different and I'm a better human and I'm living a better life and I have fundamentally rewired a lot of the toxic programming that I had within my system, there's a lot of work to be done. At the age of 40, when we're realizing that we built one half of our life strategically, unconsciously, and with an effervescence for life that didn't have us think about the consequences of our actions, sitting on the fence here at 40 and really reflecting and wanting to garner a different style of life through that lived experience it's a challenge, and it's heavy, and it's loud, and it is lonely at times. Being in this position, let's rewind back to 2022 when the podcast first started. I was in Sydney. I had been asked to help a friend out, assisting them with a role that put me in the middle of the action once again on a super yacht in the middle of a movie set. We were cooking and doing all the things amidst Ryan Gosling's making of The Fall Guy, which was really cool to be back in the action and to be able to create that level of va-va-voom on the other side of what was quite an explosive demise in the catering world for me. It wasn't that my cooking skills or my ability to run a business was thwart, but my ability to be a functioning human was thwart through my choices, or my unconscious choices and unhealthy coping mechanisms that I had used to deal with grief, to deal with a relationship that was a domestic violence. I found myself in a domestic violence relationship, and I was grieving the loss of my grandmother. Now, the whole world seems to know about this, which for me seems interesting because the only person that I disclosed those details to was the psychologist that I had a meeting with on the other side of an arrest. So public information and media, there's something obviously going there in the background. I divulged personal information only to one source, which was the psychologist that was appointed by the courts. And that information ended up in the Daily Mail. So do with that what you will. A little bit unfortunate that for the sake of selling newspapers and news that our privacy isn't actually honoured. A little bit disappointing. But fast forward 2022, I think the podcast launched in November. It was an outlet for me to communicate with the world and to express my feelings and how I felt. At the time, I felt like I was on top of the world. On reflection, I was masking more pain that I had experienced just a few short months before. I was the victim of a violent crime at the hand of someone very, very close to me. It was shocking and horrific, and I will be able to unpack the details of that crime at a later date. However, unfortunately, that I'm limited to that amount of information. So I now see that my coping mechanisms were doing things, creating stuff, doing more projects, throwing myself into work to avoid and negate having to deal with the weight and gravity of such a trauma. Obviously, 2-3 years on now, my nervous system is recalibrated to a much different frequency. I've been doing the work. I have been eating the food, doing the steps, doing all the things externally that I thought were the answer when, all of those things matter. All of those, eating the food, doing the steps. Wellness was really the key that unlocked my healing. Every day we get the opportunity to fuel our bodies with food. We get to consume content, we consume energy, we consume environments. Those choices that we make on the daily compound like interest on a credit card over time and will either impact us negatively or positively. My choices of the past, of the first few chapters of my life, whilst I had amassed huge success and huge wealth and absolutely killed it and climbed it to the top of the catering mountain and was traveling around the world and traveling overseas and cooking for celebrities, and I was the it girl. I would stop at nothing. It was mission or die, and I almost paid for that success with my life. The inability to stop and pause and reflect or invest in my health almost cost me my life. And all of the trauma that I had buried with a work addiction and in creating this big, awesome catering empire eventually came to the surface and reared its ugly head and had to be dealt with. Because doing things on top of a dysregulated nervous system or unhealed trauma is sure to wreck the ship eventually. Yes, you may sail around the ocean. Yes, you may go on adventures, but ultimately we do come back to that point where that trauma and that nervous system regulation is required for us to proceed. Food is really the easiest, most nonsensical, sensible place to start. Every day, whether you're eating 2 or 3 times a day, you get the opportunity to put into your body something that will heal you or something that will harm you. And I feel of all the places to start, food is the most perfect place to start. And it's the easiest place to start. It's the most simple. It's not the easiest, I should say.